Well, welcome everybody. It's glad to be here and on this rainy Sunday and have all of you join me as I give you God's Word, His message. I'm super happy that all of you are continuing this habit of not necessarily going to church, but getting up and getting ready to listen and be together. And so I'm glad you guys are here. God, has given me this message in that actually last Sunday. So last Sunday, after I had finished my sermon, as I was driving, I had to go get something. I don't remember what, and I was like, God, okay, so that was good. Thank you. What's for next Sunday? And He doesn't always tell me right away. Sometimes He waits just to see if I can trust Him. And almost immediately he told me, talk about the blind man from birth that Jesus healed. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And I was thinking maybe the reason I was thinking about blind people was because I was driving, and I often find that some people when they're driving, I'm thinking, are you blind? It's like, do I have my cloaking button on, in my truck that you can't see my truck and, pulling out in front of me and stuff like that. But I think we have a good message today, and so I'm happy to share it with you. And it's actually an entire chapter. John tells this story about the blind man, and he takes the whole chapter, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41 to tell it. And it's just a great story, and there's a lot in it, but I want to go over the whole thing. And so I'm just going to start, and I'm going to start reading, and I'll have different comments along the way about the things that we're reading and how they apply to us in our lives today. So let me just start. So John 9, verses 1 through 41. It says, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So let me just stop right there and think, okay, so I'm sure I'm not the only one. In fact, I know I'm not. Who's ever wondered why bad things happen? So here's this guy, he's born blind, and Jesus is basically saying that He did it. God did it. God allowed this bad thing to happen where he was born blind, and it was all for His glory. And, I'm not going to act like I understand. I accept and I trust God because of my relationship with Him, and I know He's a good God, and He works things out for His good, for His glory, for His kingdom. But I am not going to sit here and say that I understand some of the things that happen to people. A lot of bad things happen to a lot of good people, and it's really hard to understand it and comprehend it because, well, we're not God, and who can know the mind of God? I certainly don't. So anyways, as long as it is day, we must do the works of Him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And so Jesus is saying He's the light of the world, but I think it's so great that back in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus also calls us the light of the world. So He's saying, he tells His disciples, if you're going to be a disciple of mine, you're going to be light and salt in the world. And so we need to do the works that Jesus has called us to do because we're the light, we're the hope, we're all the world has. So anyway, after saying this, He spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, He told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So I don't know about you guys, but if someone had just put mud in my eyes, you wouldn't have to ask me twice to go wash it off. And I think it's interesting that he does it this way because he needed a response. And so I kind of look at it like if he had done it some other way, maybe the man would have asked, why do you want me to go do that, or why do you want me to go do this? But because of the way that Jesus did it, the man was more than happy to go and do what Jesus had told him to do. And it says, so the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes open, they asked. So I think it's interesting there that when people see good things happen and they don't have a category for it, they come up with irrational explanations. I mean, think about it. Here were people who were saying that it wasn't him, it was someone who looked like him. But it had already stated earlier that he went home. So what they were actually saying would have been that here's a guy that's not him, but he looks like him in his house. And we come up with the most irrational explanations for the things that God's doing when we don't understand it. And often we don't understand what God is doing, and that's why it's dangerous to try to explain it away. We just need to trust him and let him do his work and be in step with what he's doing. So anyway, so the people replied, or he replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. I really would have liked to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen his reaction as he's washing this mud out of his eyes. You know, I don't know, he's bent over this pool, and he washes his eye, the mud out of his eyes, and the first thing he's going to see, really, if you think about it, would probably be his own reflection. And he had never seen anything before, and I can't comprehend what it would be like to not see, but he didn't have a category for seeing. And so I'm sure people had told him, you know, you're blind, we can see with our eyes, you can't, and you wouldn't even understand what that meant. But here, for the first time, he can see. And so he goes home. And I would have loved to have been there and seen his reaction, as he was probably just staring at everything. It probably took him a long time to get home. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now I really wish they had given us his name, because I get kind of tired of keep saying the man, the blind man. But anyway, so they bring him to the Pharisees, because a lot of times what happens is when we need answers, we go and tell people who've already kind of indicated that they know everything. And in this case, it would have been the Pharisees. The Pharisees' job was basically to know everything about the law, what you should be doing, how you should be acting. And so, of course, they went to the people that would hopefully give them an answer, because they did not have a category for a man who had been born blind to be healed and now be able to see. So then it continues. It says, now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. I think it's interesting that John doesn't record that he told them about the pool of Siloam. I don't know if there's any meaning in that, but he just keeps it simple. He says, this guy put mud on my eyes, told me to go wash, and now I can see. So some of the Pharisees, being experts in the law, said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? And so they were divided. And it's interesting, divisions come when you don't ask the right questions. And so their emphasis was on the law and how it had always been done. And they were very interested to talk to him and find out about it, but I don't read anywhere that they were interested in going and talking to Jesus and asking him. And that really is the direction that they should have went. They should have gone and said, okay, we need to find this man named Jesus and talk to him. And they didn't. So it says that then they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. So once again, you see, when you don't have a category for the miraculous, they look for ways to explain it away. And so they want to talk to the parents. And so they get the parents, and the parents come in and they say, "Is this your son?" They asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That's why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." Isn't it sad that people are afraid of religious leaders? And they're afraid of how they're viewed by others, or they're afraid of losing their standing and their good reputations. And I've experienced that. I've seen that too. I mean, when my family, when we were called to go to Mongolia, we had some very good Christian people doubting that we had heard from God and telling us not to. And if there had been any fear of, man, I might not have gone. And I would have missed out on a great opportunity to spread the gospel and all the things that I learned. And yeah, it's too bad that we worry about those types of things and we don't worry about what God wants us to do. So a second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was born blind, but now I see." So when I read that part, I love the fact that they say, tell the truth, and then they tell them what they want him to say. They don't really want him to say the truth. What they want him to say is what they believe. And I think that all of us have experienced that, and maybe we've done it to others where, we did that. We said, you have to tell the truth. And they had been, but we just didn't believe it. And it's just an interesting concept. But what I love the most about this is that sharing his story, his testimony, he only has to say what he knows. He says, "I was blind, but now I see." He didn't have to have, a theological dissertation. He's just saying, this is my story. This is what I know. I was born blind, and now I see. And it's because of Jesus. So then it continues. Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" What did they really want to know? Did they want to know, the process so that they could do it? Because they wanted glory for being able to heal a blind man from birth? I don't know. But I think those are such interesting questions. And he does too, because he answers and says, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" So here, I see that the man is indicating that he wants to be Jesus' disciple. And he's willing to tell them the story again. He's like, okay, I believe in this man Jesus, and if you want to hear more about it, I'll keep telling the story as often as you want to hear it, but this is all I know. I know that I was blind, and now I see. So then, of course, they replied, and they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." How much better to be a disciple of someone who's alive than someone who's dead. And, Jesus is alive. And so Christians aren't disciples of a dead person. We're disciples of a living God. We're disciples of Jesus. And we follow him, and he's active in our lives, and he's working. And it's just such an awesome thing. It sets us apart from the other religions in the world. And they don't even know where he comes from. And so once again, they're not asking the right questions. They're not going and finding out. I just think that they've approached this all wrong, and I'm not sure if they've approached it all wrong just out of ignorance or if they're purposely doing this. I don't know. Anyway, so it says, the man answered. Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So this, I'm guessing that this man, this blind man, had gone to the synagogue every week, and had heard different teachings and different scriptures, and he knew he's pulling on this knowledge that he has of knowing that God doesn't answer the prayers of sinners. He doesn't do those types of things for people who would be sinners. He listens to godly people who do his will. So I'm not saying that God doesn't hear a sinner when they cry out for him, but I'm saying as far as God responding by healing somebody, he's not going to do that for a sinner. And so he's pulling on this information that he has, and it's probably because he went to church every week and he had heard these things. And we all have some understanding of Jesus in the Bible. Most of us. I mean, there are people that have never heard, but I'm saying, most Americans have heard something. And so if they had experienced anything miraculous like this, they would probably begin to pull out all of the information that they had to try to understand it and try to respond to it in the right way. So anyway, so it continues and it says, to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. So here they're saying that, the disciples' question earlier was, who had sinned, this man's parents or this man, that he was born blind? And I think that the Pharisees are pretty sure that it was the man that was steeped in sin at birth, because they didn't understand that all of us are born with a sin nature. So every person, whether they're a good person or not, has at some point in their life sinned against God, and they have this sin nature. And so they were trying to set themselves above this man, and they didn't know, or maybe they did and they just didn't want to admit it, that they too were steeped in sin when they were born. They were born into this sinful world with a sin nature and a desire for themselves to be selfish and do the things that they wanted to do and to ignore God. That's how we all start our life. We are selfish people and we want to do what we want to do. So they kicked him out. And Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. I love this. This is the steps of salvation. These are the steps that I'm always talking about, that I'm always reminding you guys about. That the first step is either to believe or to admit. So we either need to believe in God and then admit that we've tried to do things on our own and they didn't work, or some people are at a point where they don't believe in God, but they can admit that they're trying life their own way and it's not working, and then they're exposed to the teachings about Christ, and then they believe. And so he's following these steps, and he's believing, and he's already admitted a long time ago, I'm sure, that life isn't working for him. I mean, he begs for food and for money. Now, he's blind. He can't do anything. He's very dependent on others. And so he's more than happy to admit that his life isn't working the way he thought it should. But then he accepts this. He accepts that Jesus is the Messiah. He's healed him, and then he invites him to take control of his life, and he worships him. That is the salvation process. That's how it works for all of us. We believe, we admit, we accept, and we invite. And I see that just in this, where this man, he does those things. And he would have become one of Jesus' disciples at that point. And I'm imagining that he probably followed him from that point on and walked with him and was at parts of those crowds that were everywhere with Jesus. Because, it's not like he had a job to go back to or anything like that. He would have sold out and thrown himself completely at following Jesus and finding out more about him. Because anyone who's experienced Jesus in this way, you want to sell out. You want to just continue to find out everything you can about him. It's like, if I only know this much and he's God, there has to be so much more for him to reveal himself to us more and more every day. And I just would love to have seen or read his story from that point on. But it doesn't mention it. So Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." I think he's talking about how prideful they are. They're very prideful, and they think they know everything. They think they've got it all together. And if only everyone else was as good as they were, what a better world it would be if they were all like them. And he's saying, because you think you can see, you're blind. Those who are blind and can admit it, those are the ones who are going to receive from God. And so when I look at this, I see, what's your story? What is your testimony? What does it look like in that you were at one point blind and now you can see? Last week we touched a little bit about our responsibility as individuals, the individuals that make up the church. What is our responsibility? And we talked about how we have a responsibility to provide physically and spiritually for the needs of our community and those around us and our friends and our loved ones. And this, being able to tell your story, even without it being a theological dissertation, is providing for the spiritual needs of your community. Because if you were blind and now you can see, the people who know that they're blind and they're searching, if you tell them, "I was blind once and now I can see," that is providing for their spiritual needs. You are giving them hope. You're pointing them in the right direction. And John 8:32, Jesus says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." It's that Jesus is the truth. Truth is a person. And so we can know the truth if we know Jesus. Your testimony is truth. Unless you're making it up, which I hope no one does. Your testimony about your life and how you were once blind and now you can see, and you're telling what Jesus did and that was able to transform your life into what it is now and give you this guarantee and this hope for your future. That's truth. That's encouragement. That's hope for a lost world. Let me end with this. So in this world, your friends, neighbors, family, and strangers are living in darkness with no hope. Ephesians 4:17-18 says, "So I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts." I remember being ignorant and having a hard heart. Do you? If you can remember that, if you can remember what it was like to be blind, and then tell the story of how now you're not blind and you can see, you can encourage and give hope. We need to tell our story. People need to hear your story. And we don't need to be afraid to tell our story. And then what we need to do is we also need to continue to let Jesus reveal himself to us. So there's that initial revealing that happens. You know, for like the story of the blind man, where the blind man didn't see Jesus, but Jesus revealed himself, and then he washed and he was able to see. And so there's that initial revealing where you come to this understanding that there's something miraculous in this world. There's a God in this world. And then Jesus reveals himself more. He says, I am the one who healed you. I am that person. And then you worship him. And worship is an obedience. It's I want to do everything that Jesus wants me to do. And so we need to continue to live our lives in building on that initial story. And so it's what's God doing in your life now? So certain people need to hear your initial story, that initial revelation from Jesus. And others, you know, to be encouraged and to have their hope built up, need to continue to hear the stories of your life and what Jesus is doing for you now, and how he's revealing more and more of himself to you every day, and the different things that he's doing in your life. And you know, there's bad things happening, and then God's walking with you through it, and there's good things happening, and God's walking through you, you know, with you through it. It's like Jesus is constantly wanting to reveal more and more of himself to us, and we need to recognize that and embrace it and keep our eyes open to see it. We need to be focused. We need to get rid of, you know, all of the distractions in our life. And interestingly enough, you know, with all the things that are going on now, we've had a lot of our distractions removed, and we simply just replace them with other distractions. And what we need to just have that devoted focus on Jesus and following him and worshiping him and asking him every day, God, what do you want me to do today? I appreciate you bringing me out of death into life, from being blind to now being able to see. And is there anything I can do for you today? What do you want me to do for you today? And that's how we continue to build on our story and make it a story worth someone wanting to listen to. And so let's continue to do that and recognize that God is always looking to reveal himself more and more in us each day. All right, let me pray for you guys. So Heavenly Father, I just want to come to you now and thank you for the people who have listened to this message from you. And Lord, I want to pray for all the people who need more courage to tell their story. Lord, courage to tell their story to anybody who will listen. Lord, because it's an amazing story, because you bring us out of death into life. You bring us from being blind to now being able to see. You open our ears so we can hear from you, and you're continually revealing yourself to us. We just need to see it. We need to recognize it. We need to eliminate the distractions. So Lord, I thank you so much that you do constantly reveal yourself to us. Lord, you've revealed yourself to us in the past. Lord, you want to reveal more of yourself to us today, and you're going to continue to reveal more and more of yourself to us in the future if we'll just look and focus on you. So Lord, help us to be focused. Help us not to be distracted. And help us to prioritize you in everything that we do. Lord, I pray for everyone that they have a great week. In Jesus' name,